I work in that aspect of the business that has not really been addressed yet in depth, which is selling the stuff. Oh yeah, remember that? I work in import and distribution. So I've got a long list of goals and volumes that I need to move through the marketplace because I've got people that want to see those wines depleted, and I'm on the hook to get that done. So it's got to get done. So I need to think all the time about how we get wine moved from the winery into the distribution chain, into the retail and restaurant chain, and out of that into consumers' mouths. Because we need to remember always the consumer. I mean, we're going to make wines. We have a lot of winemakers here, a lot of viticulturists here, and you're making the wines that you like, the style that you like, the wines that you feel are the best for the region. All of that is well and good, and all of that is honorable, and all of that needs to continue, but there needs to be the end user somehow has to be brought into this equation, okay? Because otherwise you're going to end up drinking it all yourselves, and I know we all like to drink, but I don't think we can drink that much. We want to grow. So, a few things to think about. In my previous role as a sommelier, I met a California winemaker, and we're talking about wines like this versus wines like those others. We're talking about cool climate, maritime wines. Well, that means that we're not talking about those other wines, the wines that we all like to poke fun at, because we don't make them here. So I was talking with this winemaker who happens to make in California, and actually in Napa Valley, wines that are sleek, elegant, constrained, discreet, lovely, pair well with food, wonderful wines. And this winemaker said that they believed that, and we were both expressing frustration at the system as it is. This winemaker said, wine should not be a wet t-shirt competition. Okay? Now, you may think that's a little bit in poor taste. The only reason I feel comfortable using it is that quote came from a female winemaker. All right? And I'm not picking on California here, but another California winemaker from the same part of California told me separately after a discussion. He said, we're talking about terroir, and he said that terroir is bullshit. I can make anything taste like anything I want. Okay. That's pretty much ends that discussion. We're talking about, and he was making, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. We're talking about Burgundian varietals. We're talking about how we adore this wine or that wine, and it's all out the window. Okay, it's all basically chemistry. I can just tweak the dial here and do a little bit of this, add a little bit of that, take a little bit of this away, and I can make here you go, Richebourg. There's a certain amount of hubris there that I find a bit disturbing, but that was, the belief that he held to, and that was, he was very, very adamant. So, those two quotes at the start. I want to also talk about the fact that in the wine market, in this great country we live in, roughly 10% of the population drinks wine on anything approaching a regular basis. Okay? It's a big pool of people, and the question is, for wines that we're talking about, that we're concerned about, how do we erode, how do we eat into that market share, or how do we build that market share? If we can move that number from 10% to 11% to 12% to 14%, a lot of our problems go away. We have a lot more consumers out there to reach. So we need to think about doing both of those things. Let's talk, define a few terms very quickly. What are cool climate maritime wines in very general terms? I think these are wines that, in general, have lower natural alcohols. They're wines that have higher natural acidities, possibly more pale color in red wines in general terms. Fewer overripe fruit tendencies, fruit flavors, fruit aromas, and less potential, the potential for oak flavors to overwhelm a somewhat more delicate structure. So consequently, the need to be a bit more judicious and pay a bit more attention to the use of new wood. Those other wines, what we'll call mainstream or warm climate wines, tend to have the opposite, higher alcohols, lower acidities, more saturated colors, opulent, tropical, super rich, overripe fruit, which one French colleague of mine called dead fruit, wines made from dead fruit. A very large structure that encourages the liberal use of new oak. And as we know, all of those attributes are a formula to get nice high scores, high 90-point scores in the dominant press. Hence, a lot of demand and a lot of success, and it's a virtuous circle because it just encourages more of that sort of behavior. So we need to think about this dynamic that we're all faced with. What are the market positions for these two families of wines? The warm ones, the warm climate, mainstream, branded items. They dominate the retail shelf real estate. You know, a lot of us at our side of the business, we think about retail and we think about it in terms of real estate. What bottles are at eye level? What's on the bottom shelf? What's in the cool box? What's in that end cap, that case stack in the front by the register? Those are critical decisions to think about. And a lot of these wines ain't there. The warm ones are there. Advertising space in the major trade or lifestyle press, dominated by those successful big brands that tend to come from warmer climates and have all of those attributes that I talked about. The critical discourse in the general consumer magazines also tend to be dominated by those sorts of wines. The cool climate wines, the maritime wines, generally relegated to the second tier of retail real estate. They're relegated to specialist wine lists, knowledgeable sommeliers, people that love these sorts of wines for all the right reasons. There's little advertising noise out there in the public discourse because the budgets really aren't there. There's some critical dialogue, but typically it's in the more specialized channels, and it reaches a smaller audience. It's just the facts. It's just what it is. But facing those facts is the first step to making some progress in the marketplace. Given these different positions, how are these cool climate maritime wines going to compete out there in the marketplace? There's not going to be a change anytime soon in marketing budgets, I don't expect, especially in this economy right now. Retail behavior, consumer pull, all of those things aren't going to change overnight. These things are built over time. However, there is a ray of hope that I see there, and it's something that's available to all of us, and it's something that's unique, historically unique, in that we now live in a digital world where anyone can communicate to anyone. All right? We're not, the channels of communication are not constricted as they once were. Let's think about some of the ways that we talk about wines, some of the ways that we are talked to about wines, actually. Think about the major critics out there. We all know who they are. You can count them on one hand and have fingers left over. And think about the adjectives that we've had to endure for the last decade or more. One of my favorites, gobs. Anybody taste any gobs of anything last night or at lunch today? Gobs of X? Okay. Just scanning through the adjectives and all those wine descriptions. Prodigious effort. Someone made a prodigious effort to do whatever. I like this one. Well-endowed example of. Okay. Copious quantities of. Deeply colored, powerful, endless, palate staining, scorched earth. Anybody getting hungry? Fruit bomb. And my favorite, mind-boggling. Great, I want to have my mind boggled with scorched earth and my palate stained. It works. It's worked. The results are there. The 100-point score, that is a shorthand that we all hate, but we all love it when our wine gets 97 points. Walks itself right out the door. So we've got to deal with it. So we've got that language that has been imposed upon the market. Are there alternatives? Yeah, there are some alternative critics, Tanzer, David Schilknecht a little bit now, Ellen Meadows and Berghound. which I find a bit more interesting, a bit more readable, a bit more in-depth, and perhaps they offer a glimmer of hope. The challenge really is how to describe the wines that we're concerned with today, because you fall into the trap of elegance equals weakness or frailty or feebleness or lack of achievement. How do you describe less of all those other things? Less alcohol, less color, less oak. You can't describe, we have to find a language to describe these things that becomes positive. A few adjectives that I thought might work. Moderate alcohol. Okay? Everyone's in favor of moderate alcohol. We're all in favor of moderation and health and all of that these days. That's good. Subtlety, discreet, in terms of fruit expression, texture, length. Purity, it's a nice one. Authentic, similar. One that I like a lot, transparent. I like wines that are transparent, that deliver me to a place, or a varietal, or a style, or a history, or a point of view. Direct, well-crafted, balanced, and refreshing. When was the last time you heard a wine described as refreshing? But isn't that what we want wines to be, is refreshing? We want to be able to drink them. We want to drink that whole bottle with a meal and be able to get up from the table and walk away. Oh yes, and food-friendly, too. You can't forget that. We tried that back in the 80s and it kind of fell flat, but it actually is coming back nicely now. All right, a few other quick notes, and then we'll get to some questions. We'll leave terroir out of it for a moment. Where can this divergent dialogue happen? Where can this alternative reality, be found? And I think we're seeing it all around us. And I think we're at a very auspicious time in the industry right now and in our culture. We have trends in the specialist press. There's consolidation, but there's also this incredible fragmentation, this atomization of authority. We've got diversity of sources. We've got lots of niche medias. We've got lots of blogs out there. We've got lots of people seeking information from other people and going around, the handful of recognized authorities. You can go out and find information about anything. You can talk directly to the source, via the internet, via your email. It's all very, very simple now. There's a whole range of alternative authorities that range from well-renowned wine critics who publish a lot of books to your friend's best friend. There are a lot of people that go into I see them sitting in restaurants these days. I see them at stores, and they're faced with a wine choice. They've got a wine list in front of them, and one of them will pull out their phone, text their friend who knows something about wine. A minute later, they get an answer back. You should choose this one. There's their authority right there. It's not Parker. It's not the Wine Spectator. It's their friend who knows something about wine. It works. So we need to figure out how to access that network, how to access those communication channels. And this is increasingly, for many other industries, becoming a do-it-yourself task. It doesn't take a lot of investment, doesn't take a lot of resources, but it does take a willingness to enter that. Careful, Alessio. All right, so what does the future hold? What's the not-so-long view? I think that wines that we're here to talk about for these 2 days have a place in the market and increasingly are finding a resonance in the market. It's a tall order, but it is happening all around us. I think that a younger audience is very receptive to these sorts of wines because they come to wine without the preconceptions and maybe they're reluctant or they're resistant to the authority imposed upon them by a major critic, a Robert Parker or somebody else. And they're willing to experiment. They're willing to try. We see it in this sort of explosion of wine bars in New York City and elsewhere where people are pouring all sorts of things just because they want to try it. It's a great opportunity. It's a great opening for these sorts of wines. I think there's a receptive audience in the more mature drinkers who've worked their way through all that other stuff, all their blockbuster wines, all their 95-point wines, and now just want to drink because they don't want to play that game anymore. So think you've got two distinctly different audiences, but both very, very useful, very valuable audiences. I think there are alternate routes to market. You know, we're all complaining about this ridiculously complex distribution system, this three-tier system that we live in. It's under pressure every day. It's going to change. The question is only when and how it will change. And I think that needs to be paid attention to, and that needs to be exploited, and is for a lot of people. And the opportunity exists for wine producers to actually communicate directly with their consumers. Okay? And you can speak downstream. You don't just have to talk to your distributor. You don't just have to talk to your retailer and your restaurateur. You can actually leapfrog that and talk downstream to consumers and to every other stage in between. But it takes a willingness to do that, and it takes an ability to recognize the communication channels and exploit them. But it's not that hard. Other industries are doing it all the time. So I think one of the things that we need to do is think about message. We need to think about alternative ways of communicating. I think the groundswell is already there in place. You know, a few examples we heard mentioned. You know, that movie Sideways. Okay, you know, we all can tisk. We didn't like it, but for this or that. But you know what? It makes Pinot Noir fly out the door. And there are companies all over the world that have scrambled to produce Pinot Noir, from South America to Italy to everywhere, to Canada to Australia, you name it, just to cash in on that Pinot Noir thirst. It's there, it's real. It's just got to say Pinot Noir on the label. That movie had a huge impact, which is good. Mondovino, this sort of controversial film, again, one that we may not like for as a film, but it's also beginning to play a part in this groundswell of opposition to the dominant thinking. There is an alternative out there. What is it? Alice Feiring's recent book, was it Search for Love and War and How I Saved the World from Parkerization, which documents, it's a very interesting read for me because it's talking about a lot of winemakers and growers that I know and having conversations that I've had with them, and it was very interesting that there is this kind of resistance now coming up. And I think it's something that shows that there are openings in the market that we can move into, all of us. So enough from me. Let's get the opinion of some of our esteemed panelists and talk some more. So I wanted to, sort of scribbling all these questions, sitting through, I sort of thought I had my presentation kind of wrapped up a couple of days ago, and then listening to all that was said just got me thinking, and I kept, thank you. So this new packaging that you guys come up with is really, really nice. Thinking about things that were said, there were some things that Gunther said yesterday that I thought really struck me as being very meaningful, and some other things, and some things that Jacques said today, and Pascal and Eric talking about stylistic tendencies here in Long Island. I think that I'd like to kind of get people to talk about how a message gets crafted. How do you communicate about these wines, about what you're trying to do? And maybe Steve, will start with you, because you said something this morning that kind of hit the nail on the head for me, and so I didn't really have to say it. Everybody, you work your brains out and your hands to the bone, making these wines, and you get what you want in the bottle. That's when the fun begins. That's when you got to get on the road and you got to talk to people who don't really much know where Long Island is, or Santa Barbara, or Puy-Fumé for that matter. And how do you've got to get out there and convince people. How do you talk to them? What are you going to say? I mean, you have been through it, and I remember being on the receiving end of it, some years ago.
Absolutely. No, I realized that I didn't say this earlier in my presentation, but I remember the first day that I left Santa Barbara with cases of wine, and drove to San Francisco, and I had a Dodge pickup with a little shell cover on it, and I just shoved as much Brewer Clifton into the back of the thing as I could possibly shove. And I had made a list of the top 10 restaurants in Northern California that would be my dream locations to have Brewer Clifton wine being poured. And I called ahead, and I was able to make some appointments. And so I sat down and I opened up, a bottle of Chardonnay and a bottle of Pinot Noir with, some of the most elite sommeliers in some of the most elite restaurants in Northern California. And I'm not particularly proud of this, but it's kind of funny. I knew that the first question I was going to be asked is, where else are these wines served? Mm-hmm. And it's the first day that I've ever poured them, and so I just read off the other 9 on the list at the first one.
Good answer. Why?
And by the end of the day, I called my partner, Greg Brewer, and I was jumping through the roof. I had landed 8 of the 10 that were on my list, and I didn't have to lie anymore. And so...
Bravo. It was a good day.
It was a very good day. It was a very good day. And I remember absolutely, vividly, the first time I met you, Kurt, and showed you wine at Jean-Georges. And I think if there's any message that I've always tried to portray in showing my wines is the reason that I do it, and the feeling that it gives me. And I've always had the assuredness to say that I would do it whether they sold or not. Mm-hmm. That it's something I have to do, and I think just that mental attitude is what allows somebody to open their mind to some new things, some new places. I mean, making Italian varietals in Santa Barbara County is probably one of the stupidest things that anybody could ever go out and try to sell. And I think, a lot of Italian varietals are being made here, and they're fantastic, they're wonderful. I was so naive in the beginning of Palmina, I never once thought about there being resistance to those varietals. And so when I went out into the marketplace, I had to show them with the same assuredness that I show Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
And it came across. Yeah, I remember. And, something that I think Gunter hit yesterday was the ability to look your customer in the eye and speak with total belief and total commitment to what you were doing. Because your customer, whether it's an end user, consumer, or a distributor or a salesperson, is going to see through it instantly.
Exactly.
Because there's a whole lot of bullshit out there.
Yeah, and if I can just add this little piece, I mean, I really think that the wine industry in general, I mean, you can break it down into several different parts. It's part winemaking, and then it's definitely part entertainment, mm-hmm. and then most importantly, to me, the wine industry is really about relationships. And you've got relationships on both ends. You've got relationships with your growers. You've got relationships with the people that you're working with and that are either in the cellar or they're helping you sell the wine. Then you've got the people that you're contacting. You've got distributors. Those distributors take you to clients. Most importantly, you have consumers. And building the relationships all along the way is, in my opinion, more than 50% of the business.
Eric, I wanted to ask you, we tasted a really fascinating array of wines earlier this afternoon, and you were kind of, I think, you were trying to kind of get people to consider the question, is there a regional style for this particular region? I mean, do you think there is, and is that something that you could, elucidate just in words?
In really general terms, yeah, there's a regional style, but it's really general because, like I said, there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of diversity amongst all the people. Yeah. I don't think we're going to narrow it down into some specific one region style or one variety for the region in any near future time. I think our evolution really is going the other direction, and we are, spreading out and trying more things, and it is more interesting. And I think part of that reason is that we are not so much hooked into the system out here, not as much. We don't really need to be in a restaurant in LA. There's just no reason for that. We don't have enough production. We're much more interested in selling in our local region because we've got New York, which is right next door, and we can sell everything in New York. But also I think we're doing the more guerrilla approach. A lot of us are doing more of the guerrilla approach where we're going after the consumer directly rather, and just said, the system doesn't work for us.
Right.
And so we're just going to go around it. And if you're doing something like that, when you have all these neat little bits and pieces of lots of little stuff, that catches the interest. More than just, if we had a single variety for the region, then we probably would be looking at being in Denver and Miami because we're saturating the area nearby much faster.
Right. Well, Pascal, you're historically the big market for Sancerre is Paris, right? But you're involved in worldwide distribution, which is a great tribute to your success in your winemaking and also the scale that you've set your sights on achieving. How do you see communicating your message, which is somewhat specific and not the same as just Sancerre in general, but it's a Jolivet style? How do you see communicating that, and how do you do that?
Is it work?
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I'm doing that, traveling a lot, like 5 or 6 months a year.
Yeah.
And I did always believe in distribution. When I did start 20 years ago, my idea was to go to the 3-star Michelin in France to get the image. It was very difficult because, a star Michelin restaurant in France, they have 200-300 Bordeaux wines, they have 150 Burgundy, they have 30-40 Rhone Valley wine, and they have 2 or 3 Sancerre and 2 or 3 Pouilly Fumé. So I did work hard to get this, to try to get this image, say, selling 1 case this year, 2 cases this year.
Yeah.
And I always remember the first time I went to Japan in 1990, when I still work with LVMH in Japan, and I don't know if some of you have been to Japan, but it was like about, the tasting first was at 2 o'clock at the Imperial Hotel, the big hotel in Tokyo. And, what is it? So, 2 o'clock, it's working?
Yeah.
So 2 o'clock, 1:59, nobody was there, and 2 o'clock, all the Japanese came, 200 people at the same time. And I was very surprised because it was a paperboard behind me, and when people came in, somebody opened the paperboard and they just show all the 3-star Michelin where you can find Jolivet wines in France. So it means that, how do you say, is it we say flagship?
Flagship, yeah.
Flagship. So I did that first, and then I did always believe in distribution, and I noticed that more than 50% of Sancerre wines at this time were shipped to UK. So I was thinking, why going to UK if everybody is there? So I did try to spray the wine and to find in each country one of the top 3 or 4 best distributor, because I always believe in distribution, as I say. It's not that I'm lazy, but maybe a little bit. But I'm thinking, when I'm waking up in the morning, people in Asia are about to sleep, even if they work hard. And in the US, in North America, it's your turn to sleep. So I was thinking, I need a partnership more than customers. And it's what we did, for example, with Wildman in the States and in many countries. I do the same. So it's my idea of distribution, to meet as much as people as I can. Should be consumer, should be wine director, sommelier, whoever is interested in wine. So I spend my life to do that. So I have much more a lifestyle than a job.
I'll testify to that. Something we've talked about the sort of about and around the attributes of these sorts of wines, whether they're blended varietally or blended from different sites. But I think what we're looking for is, it seems to be that what we're getting is a sense of finesse, a sense of elegance. But how does one talk about that? Because, you know, it's easy to talk about, well, my wine is just the biggest, baddest wine out there. You know, it's got lots of alcohol, it's got lots of color, it's got lots of this, it's got lots of that. How do you talk about finesse? How do you talk about elegance? How do you talk about subtlety in a way that communicates, that registers? Jacques, any experience?
So, trying to put it out, but doesn't want to come. Yes, actually, this is exactly the message that I tried to give with my wines from Kangaroo Island. I mean, Australia is not recognized today as being a world of finesse. And they've made their reputation making wines which are extremely powerful, high in alcohol, very glycerol-y wines, and extremely sweet in taste. Not that sweet so much in sugar and residual sugar, despite a lot of commercial wines coming out of Australia have residual sugar. But that's the reputation they had. And me, when I moved to Kangaroo Island, I started to see in 2000 a change in the market. And I could see that people started to get bored a little bit about this kind of wines. There were a part of the market, still at that time, a niche part of the market, which was looking for finesse, elegance, refined, and lower alcoholic wines. But not only relating alcohol and finesse, okay? There's some fantastic fine wines made which are at 14.5% alcohol, and we tasted one of them this morning. And so this is absolutely possible to make extremely refined wine, even in high alcoholic wines. And but how to bring the message when you come from a country which doesn't have that message? And that's how I'm still struggling a little bit showing my wines from Australia everywhere around. My wines from Australia are all around 13 to 13.5, 14% alcohol. They're all made in a very refined style. I did not show too much about what I'm making over there, but high density vineyard, all handcrafted wines and everything. It's very low, little volumes, but all extremely refined and elegant. And when you taste them, blind, you cannot even say they come from Australia. You cannot even say they come from the older world because they're fruitier than the older world. That's the characteristic of what we get from over there. But anyway, you go to the market and you pour these kind of wines and people say, oh, this is fantastic. So I went to Sweden one day and I showed the wine over there. And in Sweden, they tried to walk away from Australian wines, despite they've been one of the largest wine importers for Australian wines. And they tried to walk away from that because they want to go back to something more refined and more elegant. And they could not believe that. I remember the title of the article I got from the journalist. He said, "Fine wines from Australia. Is it possible?" And yeah, but that's. And he started to talk about my wines and trying to demonstrate that actually I made wines which were in more refined style. But it is true that it's very hard to get that message around. It's what everyone talks about. Even sometimes I find some critics. Made by highly regarded critic people, and they show wines which are extremely powerful. They're very full of weight, and they still talk about them with finesse, talking there's finesse in these wines, which I don't believe they have any finesse. I mean, this is my opinion. But anyway, the message has to be delivered. It's a long-term message. This is something you have to go and do. You have to go to the market. You have to pour that, and you have to find the channels, which are your channels. Okay, you must make a wine which is definitely of a certain level of quality. You must make a wine which is definitely going to match a certain quantity of consumer, but you have to reach these consumers by the right channels. They're hard to find sometimes, they're not easy, I mean, but they exist, and it depends, when you say that you, Pascal, that you spend your life, half of your life, trying to sell your wine, this is true, this is amazing the time, even me as a winemaker, I spend on the road trying to push my product. You see, I have to come to wherever around the world. You see in the United States, in Canada, I go to Japan, I go to Vine Expo in Hong Kong or wherever, and I'm behind my booth and looking like anybody else and trying to push my product. This is tough. But this is the only way, and then slowly over the time, you open these doors. You see, and you prove your product, you prove your style, and it works.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that You know, the danger is that people get frustrated with the market and they turn away from it. I think you have to engage with it even more. You know, you just have to dig your heels in and say, you know, we're not going to be defeated. We're going to find the right channel. It may not be, you know, I thought it was this retail chain or something. It's not that. Maybe it's this group of wine bars in the Lower East Side or something. You know, whatever it might be. But it requires, I think, being attentive to the shifting nature of the marketplace. You know, I know Pascal. You know, is famous. You know, we try and call him. I call him on his cell phone. You know, and Pascal, where are you? Oh, I'm in Dubai. I'm in Lebanon, or I'm in Japan. You know, I know that he's out there, and he's. What
is he doing?
Well, I think he's selling his wine. I hope.
Do I have to answer?
If you like, you may.
Yeah, speaking, you know, I was very surprised that this year in 2008. Our second market is the Emirates.
Emirates.
So I don't want to say I work so hard in Dubai, but it's a very important market now, and it's amazing what happens there.
Yeah.
So it's important, I think.
Sure.
And we don't have the same money problem, you know. People, they buy expensive wines. They don't really talk about the price of the wines. They talk about quality, and it's very interesting.
Eric, a question for you to kind of to bring it back to this region's wines and a kind of alternate or sort of, you know, in your backyard kind of distribution that you're talking about. What sort of resistance? How would you characterize the types of resistance to the wines that you see? You know, reluctance. And what objections do you find coming from potential buyers?
I don't that much.
You don't?
Because the potential, most of our potential buyers, like I said, we're headed more toward the direct consumer approach.
Okay.
And so we're tasting wines with people who are buying those wines. And it's pretty straightforward. And then it's not a matter of resistance. We're not hooking into that system where there's some buyer that has the power over your life. So we don't run into that. We just don't.
And even selling, not just selling direct to consumers, say, who come to the winery, but actually sell, or on the mailing list, but actually selling to restaurants or to retailers. You find there's already sensitivity.
Since we're not trying that hard to go through that system, we do sell direct. Okay. We do sell direct, but they tend to be more old customers that we've known for a long time. We have long relationships, sure. Okay. And so we're not trying that hard to break into all sorts of new stuff because we're pushing them more the other direction. We want to get out of the system.
Yeah. And it's certainly more profitable.
It works. It's a lot less work too. We don't have to go to Dubai.
Right.
That can be good. May I say something about Dubai? I forget to tell you something very interesting I did in Dubai 2 years ago. I've been invited by the Hyatt Hotel in Dubai as a few wine producer and a few chefs. And it was very interesting. It was a full week of what they call, I don't remember, it was like a gourmet summit event in Dubai. So it was a studio kitchen, and the chef did cook, and the wine producer did show the wine, and we can see how you can match the food and the wine. And each wine producer had to find a subject. And already this time I did choose a subject, natural food for natural wine. I mean, healthy wine for healthy food. And it was very interesting for me to show how you can match a very healthy, naturally wine with a natural food. So it's this kind of thing which can help on the market.
Do you find, is it easy or more difficult to communicate your perception or your ideology of natural winemaking? Is it easy for you to talk about natural winemaking, or is that a challenge?
It's quite easy for me because it's something I have not in my mind but inside me. For example, if I eat bad food or if I drink a bad wine, I can tell it immediately. I don't know why, but it's like that, you know. So I believe that a wine can be easily digest like the food. It's not only the problem of having a headache if it's too much sulfur. It's the problem of digestion of the wine.
But to communicate that.
Sorry, to communicate. If you are convinced yourself, it's a little bit easier to do it.
Sure.
But it's a subject, you know. I agree that when you say before that wine should be not only drinkable, but what did you say? Very not zesty. You use another word. You say what about a wine which is refreshing?
Refreshing. Yes. Thank you.
It's something. Merci. Thank you. It's something I like to say that the wine, when it's good, you know, wine is also what I always say. Wine is also a beverage. It means, why don't you drink a good glass of wine if you are thirsty? Why not having a good white wine, or why not red wine or rosé? It depends. When it's very pure, very clean, very refreshing. I personally much prefer balanced wine with not too much alcohol, with good acidity. It's what we do in our countries here and in France. And it's always the way I talk about the wine, that the wine has no need necessary to be 14, 15 alcohol. Be very balanced and clean and easy to drink.
Okay.
Even, sorry to add something, even I've done so many wine tasting. I'm thinking myself, if I don't produce wine which are very acceptable, it's very, very difficult, you know, to do those tasting, to taste like 50, 100 wines a day. It's terrible. And it's too heavy.
I would agree with that. I think it takes time to kind of go through the other side and then come back around to wines that are actually then refreshing, and you can drink and you can enjoy. Jacques, I wanted to ask you about, as Pascal reminded me of something, what do you see about what's happening, this trends that are happening in France, in the French market, as regards styles of wine consumption? Are things changing? Are young people making different choices than their parents made as far as drinking wines?
Yes, there is changes. I mean, for sure, like anywhere else. I mean, it has happened in many countries and in classic countries, because we are classic producing countries, for sure. So we have a long history in wine consumption. But we've seen the consumption has really changed. And what makes the things changing, I think this is the ability of people to travel. And they discover new things, they get in touch with new tastes, and they compare as well what they have at home and what they see elsewhere. And they go back home and they want to try. But today, we have within the company I was in before, I mean, we have had one of the largest importing business. We were importing Beringer from United States. We import Villa Maria Estate from New Zealand, and Penfolds from Australia, and various wine from the New World like that are distributed. And we find out that still today we struggle in distributing these wines in France. The French consumer is extremely classic. I think he has moved. The French wines have increased in quality enormously over the last 20 years, and there's a huge change and in quality. So there's not so much need, maybe, I will say, for the French consumer who has such a choice of wine coming from France to go and look for something else. And sometimes he likes to have a sort of exotic consumption, which means that one evening in a restaurant he will say, oh, let's have that Chilean wine, you see, and why not trying this, this wine from wherever, Spanish it can be, or it could be a North American wine, and they try it, but do they go back to it? Not specifically. They might find it very good, but they might stick to the classic. I mean, I think this is the attitude we find in France. The people, we tend to place a bit more foreign wines on the tables every day, but this is extremely slow process, and wine is still in favor, the French consumer still in favor of his own wines, and the process has been extremely slowed anyway, because the French consumption has dropped by a lot due to several government regulations, and so unfortunately I think it has slowed the process down.
Steve, I wanted to ask you also, coming from let's say New World Classic region, California, even though you're not in Napa, as we all know now. But still, you're in California, which is well known, has kind of put the New World on the map. How do you coexist with the kind of dominant thinking, the dominant flavors, or how do you find your place within a California construct?
Well, I think I start even before I'm out showing the wines with other wines. I kind of start the mental process for me, and it's interesting. I think it's really easy for all of us to vilify the writers and what have you, but I think before they're ever going to change their direction, we're going to have to all change our sort of mentality of how we look at how we make wines and then how we judge them for ourselves, because we all do. Each time that we drink several different wines, we're making judgments on them. But I think that the most dangerous thing that I've seen in the marketplace is people drinking wine with wine, like I spoke about this morning. And if you line up 12 or 15 different wines, whether they're the same varietal or they're not, by the time you get to the 15th wine, each wine has to be bigger and more bombastic in order to get your attention, in order to just to make you remember it, if nothing else. And that's, in my own opinion, is what's really destroyed the elegant, more subtle style of wine in the world. And once everyone puts it back into its natural place, back on the table, back as an extension of the plate, and back as a conversation starter between people, then everything will start falling back into place. And that's the message that I put out, whether I'm traveling to different places. And I have to say, we all have a blast traveling to a lot of places. So no pity party for the traveling part. But I think that's the message that we have to tell ourselves first, and then it helps to get it across to the consumer. But specifically to your question, I'm constantly asked to give some sort of a qualification for the differences between, let's say, Pinot Grigio that I'm producing and benchmark Pinot Grigios, or Tokai Friulano or Dolcetto. And like I was saying earlier today, in my opinion, it requires having the utmost knowledge and respect for what the benchmarks and the classics are, and at the same time, making translations in the place that you're at, not making emulations. And translation's really tricky, and most of these guys that have spoken can say it better than I. But when you take a phrase in one language, you can't literally translate the phrase to another language, and it really makes sense because there's so much culture and context that's involved in each of the words. And so the best thing a translator can do is to take that phrase and to try to get the true meaning out of it, not the literal translation. And that's what I think you have to do with wines when you're in a non-classic place and you're putting your wines with the classics.
It's a nice way of avoiding saying the word terroir.
Exactly.
I guess a couple of other questions and we can wrap up. But do we all feel encouraged by what's happening in the market? Any feelings of optimism or pessimism either way? Anyone?
It's been a great year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a great year.
Yeah, I think we have to be extremely optimistic. I mean, if not, we can close the door and put the key under the carpet. And no, that's for sure. I think there's, as I said, I think there's a change in the market and in the perception of wine by the public, and which we still don't see through the channels, because we have to analyze all the different parts. You get the producer, then you have the channels, and then you have the consumer. And very often your wine is chosen by someone, by a wine buyer who has sometimes no opinion at all of what the consumer wants. But he has his own opinion, and sometimes he's your barrier. I mean, you cannot go even further than him, which is a real problem. And I agree with Eric when he says that why to go to Dubai and try to find a distributor in Dubai. You will have to explain about your wine. When someone walks through your door, the consumer comes directly to you. You see, he comes to your door and buys your wine, drink it with you, share it with you, and walks through the door, you see, with a case of wine. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, we have to go all around the world and trying to sell our wine because we don't have that many people walking through our door. And but anyway, to answer your question, I think there's a change in the market for more refined, more elegant wines, and there's an increase in wine consumption around the world, which is very encouraging today. We have as well a slight decrease in production, sounds like, due to complications in productions, due to global warming, due to changes in climate, floodings or droughts. So I think at the moment there's still some very good times in front of us. There's currency problems at the moment, you see, with the low dollar and high euro, but it creates opportunity for people in the eurozone, and it creates opportunities for people in the dollar zone, you see, to export. So I think at the moment it's still a very interesting industry, and I'm personally extremely optimistic.
Bravo, good. Pascal, optimist?
Yeah, of course I'm optimist.
Of course.
I think wine is becoming more a culture the last 15, let's say maybe 15, 20 years. Everybody now knows about wine. Mm-hmm. In the past, people, they were not so well informed, and if you are all there today, it's because you are interested in wine, and there is many people, more and more people, who read more about wine, who do more tasting. Even in France, you know, we are very, I think Jacques agree with me, but French, we are very proud of knowing wines, but in the past, French people, they don't know anything about wine because they didn't even know that Beaujolais was a Gamay and Sancerre was a Sauvignon Blanc. The press in France, I'm not very impressed with the press, if I can make a word game, in France, but they inform a little bit and people read more and more. In some newspapers, so we have much more information about wine. And slowly, in some restaurant, like last week, I had a lunch at Jean-Georges in Paris. I mean, it's under the name Market. And the sommelier was very happy, very proud to make me taste Albarino. Not as good as one from Katia. I don't know if she's there, but sorry, I don't have my glass. And you know, people in France, like everywhere, know more and more about wine. And I can notice that in most of the wine dinner I'm doing, I've seen lots of interest, and you cannot imagine now any social event, any private dinner, any wedding without any good wine. So it's good for the future of all of us.
Now, Pascal, you reminded me of something I wanted to ask you earlier, actually during your presentation. Because there seems to be, from my point of view, some contradictory trends happening in France right now. Mm-hmm. Consumption is dropping. Okay. Consumption of wine, of alcohol is dropping for a bunch of reasons. Young people tend to be consuming more non-wine beverages. Cocktails are very trendy right now. And wine in some quarters is described as being something that's more, for one's parents. And yet at the same time, we're seeing pressure on the INAO to modify the restrictions that govern French winemaking, to make it more open, perhaps, more competitive. And we're also seeing an explosion of organic, biodynamic wine consumed in wine bars in Paris. I don't know how we fit these things together, but there's this strong trend now to drink Wandertalben and these crazy wines that we might describe as unstable, but they're interesting and they're cheap and they're available, and they've managed to take some root in the marketplace. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, there is a trend in some in many places, like some wine bar, to give you a wine by the glass. Wine by the glass is something which is a little bit new in France. In the States, it's so many years you have wine by the glass, but in France, more and more now we can find wine by the glass, not only because there is no tolerance for alcohol when you drive, but also because it's a way to discover much more new wines. And you can sometimes find wines that I don't even know myself. I don't know for you, but sometimes very tiny production. So it's interesting. The young people, unfortunately, at night when they go to clubs, they continue to drink a lot of alcohol, like vodka or gin or things like that. I try to do a little bit, and as much as each time I see somebody, I say, why don't you drink a good wine? It's better for your health than to drink so much alcohol, which is coming from we don't even know where.
Right.
No, it's a long way to do that. And myself, if I did start to with a new wine under the grape variety Sauvignon Blanc, this wine which is called Attitude, it was to capture the attention of the new generation. And this wine is 12 alcohol. It's not a lot, only 12. Yeah. But it's only 12 for two reasons. Because it's in the Touraine area, on the west part of Sancerre, and also with the law, I don't want to say stupid law, but with the French law, I had to declassify the vineyard to how do you say, not to make it like a AOC, but like a vin de pays. So with a vin de pays, you cannot produce more than 12 alcohol. It's like that. So I think with this kind of wine, which are light, nice character, you can, and with a grape variety name, because for the young generation, it's easy to know and to remember what is a Chardonnay, what is a Syrah, what is a Sauvignon or Cabernet. But to remind that Sancerre is only one grape, so it's easier. But when you speak about the Bordeaux, I think Jacques can give his opinion about that. But it's very difficult for the new young consumer to remember how the wine is made, which kind of grape, etc. It's important to maybe to capture a little bit the attention of the young people.
Maybe we'll see. We'll see. Any comments on Bordeaux?
I mean, it's very hard to capture the attention of the youth in France. I mean, we just because by law, by regulation, we cannot advertise about wine. So I mean, how do you want to capture the attention of the youth?
Why don't you say we cannot do anything? It's easier, no?
Sorry?
Why don't you say we can't do anything in France?
Yeah. Because you didn't want to say.
That's why you cannot buy, obviously.
We can only lie.
That's true. That's true. So, question? Sure. Yeah. Questions, please.
Larry.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to take a stab at that?
I don't see why my wine tastes better because I'm selling it in Detroit. It doesn't change my wine. I want people to drink the wine. And you were asked before about optimism and pessimism. How can you be pessimistic when your customer tells you to your face that they love your wine? You got to be optimistic. Can't help it.
I think to Larry's point, which I think is a good one, and one that I've wrestled with a bunch of brands, is how, well, what are your growth intentions, if you have them?
Basically none.
Okay, so then are you secure? Is your hold on that market secure? And if so, then you're fine. You're okay. But for the region at large, how now there are so many more wineries in this region. How is there enough local market to satisfy their growth expectations as well? And if so, fine. But then there's a whole other side of the question, which is if the region is going to put itself on the map, then isn't it going to have to be in some key strategic markets? Maybe not Detroit, but maybe San Francisco, and maybe Miami, and maybe Chicago, and maybe Dallas, and maybe Las Vegas. And that, those are the questions that I think the region kind of as a whole and individually need to ask themselves. I mean, you've done the same thing. You've been through the exercise.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different reasons for it. For me choosing to over infrastructure, if you will, for marketing, and one of the biggest reasons was that I enjoy it. I enjoy going to other markets and meeting different people and selling wine and tasting different foods, what have you. And so it was part of why I wanted to be in the industry in the first place. And that's just a personal thing. It has nothing to do with anything except that statement. But the other side of it is, like I'd said earlier, when I started in Santa Barbara County, there were 24 wineries in our region. There's now over 300. And we have, a certain amount of tourism and a certain amount of people walking through our door, for sure. But with that sort of explosion, and as your question mentioned, the growth that I needed to make in order for this to be a viable living for me, and the growth that I wanted to make, I needed to not end up being the flavor of the month, and then with 300 other wineries coming along very quickly, them becoming the hot ticket the next month, and selling a lot out of my tasting room today, but possibly not next year. And so my decision to do it was to just always have more demand than supply, and always just keep things feeding into the different places.
And your volume is increasing?
Yeah, so Brewer Clifton, the first year when I was talking about going up and selling out of the truck, we made 240 cases. We made just over 8,000 cases this year. We planted an additional 40 acres with hopes of growing the brand to about 15,000 cases over the next 3 years. Palmina, the first year was just about 133 cases, and that was back in '95. And we've consistently made 12,000 cases for the last 3 years, and all the wines distributed. Brewer Clifton sells about 50% to retail customers on a mailing list. We cut that off to be able to supply our distributors. Palmina sells about 25 to 30% through tasting room and our wine club, and the other 70% runs through distribution channels.
I think that if you buy into the system, as you talk about the system, you're addicted to growth. I think you must grow. And by
I don't
opting
wish
out
to
of the
grow
system,
anymore.
we're happy with not growing.
Yeah,
We're
totally.
just very comfortable with that.
No, that's great. And I had a preconceived sort of stop, a place where I wanted to grow too, and in many ways probably did it faster than what was safe. But like I said, Palmina, I can't. Well, it won't grow beyond 12,000 cases, and it's been consistent for the last 3 years, and I've found that sort of place. Now, it's been more a matter of focusing, because like I said, we grew to 17 different wines. That's a ridiculous thing to give to a distributor and expect them to have 17 SKUs. And so everything's been focusing down to 6 core wines that are in distribution, and the rest of them are fun for either the tasting room to have or for our wine club to try and for me to make. And so that's been my theory.
Anyone? Question? Yes.
Hey, I'd like to come sort of full circle in this meeting and give you a consumerized view of terroir, and then see if I can get your reaction to it. My sense is that there's a fundamental difference between the old world and the new world with respect to the definition of terroir. If you look at the appellation law, which is the appellation law in France, it's completely based on the concept of terroir, with every appellation defining a different terroir. But the appellation law not only includes the particular place, but it includes the particular grapes that can be used there. It includes particular grape growing practices that can be done there. It includes the winemaking practices that can be made there. And therefore, when I think of terroir in the old world, it includes all of that, everything that the winemaker and the vineyard owner does besides the specific estate. That's terroir. But in the new world, in the U.S., where we have the ADA system, all the ADA system does is to define a place. It doesn't say anything about the grapes. It doesn't say anything about how those grapes are grown or how the wine is made. And so it is much more difficult for the sense. It's almost useless to the consumer because the only thing the consumer gets out of it is that Napa Valley has a good reputation. But if you're looking for a particular style of Chardonnay, if you don't know anything about a particular winery, you don't have a clue as to what kind of style you're likely to get. Okay, so I think there's a fundamental difference in how we look at terroir.
I think France might be overregulated a little bit.
No, we're not overregulated. There's still room for more regulation in France, and because there's people finding new ideas every day, and but I don't completely agree with what you say for the new world, because we see the things changing for the new world, and let's give an example like Australia, for example, and if you take a place like McLaren Vale in South Australia, I mean, McLaren Vale now is recognized as a sort of benchmark for the Shiraz, And what we find out is that with the time, it takes a long time, but some places, as you say, for example, Napa, I mean, you have, in Napa you can make Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon. But I think when people think about Cabernet in US, they think about Napa. So it means that that place has made its name not only for being a place where you can make any sorts of varieties, but as well where a certain variety has proved making very high quality wines. And then you go to Russian River. Okay, what do you think about Russian River? You think about Pinot, you see? And you go to Oregon. Oregon, you think only about Burgundian grapes, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So I think slowly over the time, these regions, it has taken us more than 200 years, 300 years in Europe to come to fine-tune to the variety that we wanted to use per region. But it sounds like in the new world, this thing is slowly happening over the time, and there's some regions which are getting recognized more and more for a certain type of variety. They might still grow because this is allowed, other varieties, but they have one or two varieties which are definitely their flagship.
I agree with Jacques. I would like to say something like, just with your question, it reminds me that more than 20 years ago, just at the beginning when I started my company, I've been visiting Napa, and excuse me, I was at Mondavi, and I don't know why, but Robert Mondavi himself talked to me and received me. He didn't know me, obviously, but I don't know why either he opened a bottle of Echezo to Romanée Conti to compare to his Pinot Noir. And I had a visit, And at this time, they told me that now they start to think about terroir 20 years ago, and they use satellite in California. I didn't believe, but obviously they did, to find the best terroir. And it reminds me that
in various locations in the New World? Yeah, yeah. Because I think, I think that, we're kind of, we're all torn. I think, we're refreshed by the adventurous experimentation that is allowed to go on here. And it allows all of those, whatever it was, 36 varietals or whatever to be worked with. Which is something that you don't have in France now, anyway. Maybe 500 years ago, and so it's exciting, and there's a great sense of experimentation, and yet there's a great sense of comfort if you grow up in Nuit Saint-Georges. Well, pretty much if you want to make wine what you're going to be doing. You're not going to be growing Rafosco. And there's a great the game is different there. It's about fine shading and subtle differences from here to here. Whereas here, all bets are off. It's wide open. But Eric's, the title of your of your presentation earlier suggested that there might be an emerging regional consensus of some sort. But I think we're a long way from that.
A very long way, and I don't know that it's mandatory that it emerges.
Yeah.
I was just exploring the idea of it,
Sure.
the concept of a regional identity like that. I don't think we have. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
It's pretty interesting, though. In the world, because of technology and a lot of different factors, there's more great wine being both made and consumed than any other time in the history of the planet. At the same time, whether you look at a country that has all the regulations and all the restrictions, or you look at New World places where there are none, there's great wine being made and there's crap. So it's not as though you're going to regulate the crap out. So
True. Yeah.
There's even more crap. There's even more crap in Europe than we think. I mean, it is true, because we focus in thinking about that we have these great Bordeaux wines, but if you look just at the volume of Bordeaux which is made, I mean, we make 6 to 7 million hectoliters of wine every year, and we only hear about less than 1% of them. And when you hear about all these top rating wines from Bordeaux, they represent less than 1% of the volume of Bordeaux. And we can say that at least 40% of the wine made in Bordeaux is not extremely very interesting. So, and it happens in many regions. In Italy is the same. I mean, in Spain is the same. So for sure, regulation has some advantages. It has some disadvantages, like deregulation. I mean, you see. So I don't think there's a way which is better than another.
Yep. $250,000?
Give it to Kurt.
Yeah, there you go. Hire me.
If we split that amongst this group, how much would each of us get?
Pretty easy. Well, $250,000, you can do a whole, bunch of things, but, you could buy 5 full-page ads in Bon Appetit. Is that going to get you there? Probably not. You could take a symposium like this on the road if you wanted to. You could do, what I'm getting at is that you probably should think about a combination of things, not too many, but not too few. I think it's important for people to actually taste the wines, so creating opportunities for the wines to be tasted. It's the most basic advertising there is, but it does cost some money. It depends on I think stepping back a bit and deciding what the objective is. And you've got the resource there, $250,000. What's the objective? Is the objective to conquer the New York restaurant world? Okay, if that's it, then you can devise some strategies to do that. Is it to make New York wines, put New York wines on a par with California and Washington State and Oregon? Well, then that would take some different set of strategies. It really depends on what you want as a group to accomplish. Obviously, every winery wants to be successful. It wants to pay its bills and turn a profit as quickly as possible. But as a region, I think you're not brand specific. You're more region specific. So how do you tailor your strategies to build up the recognition in the marketplace of the region? And it could be a combination. It's very simple things. It could be a combination of promotions. It could be advertisement. It could be creating ambassadors. It could be some sales support. I'm not sure.
We unfortunately have to come to a conclusion. Thank you so much, Kurt, and to all of the speakers. Thank you.
Hand it over to Louisa.
Just a final word of thanks to our wonderful guest speakers, all of you. I think this has been an extraordinary time for us, and I hope that, in fact, what comes out of this will be both some emerging leadership and some continuing to work for us to work together as a group here on Long Island, and also as a bunch of individuals who increase the network of associations with people like yourselves from other parts of the wine world who can give us so much camaraderie and so much of a boost, and the optimism is no small part of it. So I want to thank all of you once again, and I think this has been a great success. I hope you agree, and I welcome any comments because we do plan to do it again, and one thing we might do with all that money is to lobby back with it so that we can get a law like Oregon has where every single bottle sold in the state gets money for promotion and research for the wine industry. I don't know, just a thought. Anyway, thanks a lot.